Welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek. I'm John Harrington, the editor of PRWeek UK, and I'm joined by my colleagues, PRWeek news editor Siobhan Holt and senior reporter Evie Barrett. Hi to you both.
Hi, John.
Hello. So, we're going to talk about a few things in the news, but sadly not the budget. We're recording this just before the budget announcement, and most people will hear it just after. But do visit prweek.com for opinion and analysis on that. But we do start on a financial theme by looking at the third quarter results for the big holding companies, which we've seen in recent weeks. Last week, WPP reported a slowing of growth in its PR division, where like-for-like revenue rose 0.2% in Q3 versus growth of 1.5% in Q2. Of its rivals, PR businesses for Omnicom and IPG grew by 4.3% and by mid to high single digits respectively in Q3, again on like-for-like organic basis. Now, there's a lot of detail, obviously, we could go into here. We won't labour the point, but going back to WPP, the holding company said Burson declined by mid-single digits as the business continued to be hit by the loss of Pfizer. It also said macroeconomic uncertainty was hitting some client spending. FGS Global performed strongly, but of course that business will soon leave WPP anyway. My take on this is that Burson has yet to feel the real benefits of the merger, and obviously the merger this year between H&K and BCW, in terms of financial performance. The other wins have so far failed to mitigate the loss of Pfizer, obviously a huge account, although it picked up some decent new business, including Google in the quarter, should be said. Having said that, the uncertainty around the election in the US is undoubtedly delaying some client spend, and it's kind of mirrored a bit in the UK in relation to the budget, where the prospect of higher taxes is looming, and that has led to some client caution, I think it's fair to say. So, Siobhan and Evie, what do you think about these results from WPP and the other big holding companies?
I mean, there's been growth at least in Q3, and there was growth in Q2, but the figures show it's still been a really challenging year for the PR industry overall. And I think anecdotally, we're definitely hearing that as well when we're speaking to agency leaders. And at many of the agencies, the UK results, and obviously that covers divisions, not just PR, there's advertising and other elements in that, but overall they were either down or flat. And I spoke to an industry professional, should we say, this week, and they said, is flat not the new growth? And I did think that was a really interesting point, that a lot of the holding companies, it's just showing it's a really tough time out there. And although I think this year it's slowly picking up, and we've definitely heard that when we've asked about the pitching process, they say that it is improving, but it's still really challenging out there for many agency bosses.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one arguably sort of bright spark or clearly controversial issue in many ways, but something that at least the holding companies can point to some progress has been AI. You know, going back to WPP, I noticed that in their results they said monthly active users of WPP Open, which is its sort of AI marketing operations system, have more than doubled. That's since the start of this year. We don't know where it doubled from, of course, but as I say, there's some progress here. And obviously we could have a podcast, probably 17 podcasts on AI, so we won't get too bogged down in that today. But remember, WPP and the other big holding companies are betting big on AI and similar technology. WPP is investing £250 million a year in it, for example. So I do think at least there's reason to think that some positivity is there in this quarter, and it's certainly not all bad.
I actually attended a WPP roundtable on AI not too long ago, and you're right, John, it does feel like there's real emphasis on that as kind of leading the future of their business. Their clients seem really on board with it too. There were Marcoms pros from Mars and L'Oreal there, and they're using it in their major campaigns, developing bespoke outward-facing AI tools that consumers can interact with, not just using it internally, which I thought was interesting. Obviously, with that comes a huge emphasis on ethics and responsible use. One thing that stuck out to me from that session was Alison Spray, EMEA Chief Data and Intelligence Officer at Burson, pointed out that although there's a huge focus on generative AI for efficiency in the day-to-day tasks, cognitive AI actually has a big role to play for the comms industry in helping agencies and their clients to understand how audiences will behave, predict how they're going to react, and then how that can then change the discourse between businesses and their stakeholders. She said, the thing that I think is really important for us as counsellors to brands is how we can help them see around corners. So I think yeah, the importance of AI beyond the obvious things that people are talking about really shouldn't be downplayed at the moment.
Looking more generally at trading, I mean, we've had our trading tracker that continues to kind of paint a picture, maybe a picture of a more sort of UK focused perspective, and maybe from more independent agencies. And I really get a sense of that clients are jittery. I mean, that was one of the big quotes that came out from our most recent trading tracker. This sense that there is this uncertainty. I mean, obviously, we've got the budget here that I don't think can be underestimated in terms of its potential impact on the business community with all of these leaks about tax increases and so on. And goes without saying, the US election as well. So it really does feel like a period of uncertainty, but perhaps from the latter half of this calendar year onwards, we will have a bit more certainty with post-budget period, and obviously we'll know who's going to be in charge in the White House. So from an optimistic point of view, maybe there are reasons to not be totally downbeat about what's on the horizon.
If this year showed anything, that is the pattern, isn't it? We saw this slightly before the UK election as well, that many agencies were saying that they were glad the announcement was earlier because they'd felt that it was holding up work and decisions because uncertainty causes that sort of restraint. I am a little bit concerned that we're hearing that there's been departures and redundancies and people moving from some of these holding companies, and I hope that if the results haven't been as strong, that those decisions don't happen again. But I think you're right that there is optimism that when we have decisions from the US election, and as you say, some of this work that's happened pushes through, and hopefully then, as you say, maybe 2025 will be much stronger and the golden period will also be golden.
Let's hope so. I mean, looking back at our most recent trading tracker, which related to September, to be fair, but a lot of it's still very relevant. I mean, the sort of mood music was fairly mixed. Some people talking about it being subdued and the sort of the fear of worst case scenario with the US election and the UK budget. But others talk about there being a lot of new business out there. Super busy month in September is what one agency boss said. We've had others talking about leads flying around everywhere. I don't think that's a football reference. So I do think that we're kind of talking in broad brushstrokes here, but as always in this industry, there are going to be plenty of nuances and different experiences, but it does feel like the industry is holding its breath a little bit. So let's see how things pan out over the next few weeks. Okay, next up, we're going to look at a perennial controversial topic, client pitching. There's some new PRCA research on the pitching process that's out. Evie, you've been looking at this. What does it say?
Yeah, so some top line stats. There were almost 500 UK respondents to the survey. Out of these, half said that they'd experienced IP theft during the pitching process, and roughly 3/4 said that they actually experienced this once or twice a year. Some other stats: 1 in 3 of those surveyed reported winning pitches that never materialise. And in terms of average investment per pitch, it was found to be around £7,000, although some agencies reported spending upwards of 20 grand per pitch. So some quite interesting stats there.
Yeah, I mean, some of those, there's a number of things to look at, isn't there? I mean, IP theft has been something that we've covered in this podcast and in PR Week for quite a long time, and it does come up. And sometimes agencies go public with accusations that their client has stolen what they do, but most of the time they don't. And, privately you hear quite a lot of grumbles. I don't know if you found this as well with people from agencies, creative directors and so on, sort of saying, yeah, they adapted an idea that we presented to them when they took on a different agency. So it feels like that is a perennial problem, but I've never seen any stats on it before. So I think that's really interesting.
It's a tough one to prove, really, because, people come up with similar ideas. Anyway, I was having a conversation with someone from an agency recently saying that they had to pull an idea just before it went live because a competitor had done virtually the same thing. And it's like, how similar does it have to be for you to prove that it was a stolen idea or that kind of thing?
I mean, I think the point about the investment in a pitch kind of struck me. The average around 7,000. Some agencies reported, as you say, spending upwards of 20 grand. I imagine it's one of those things where you can find an average, but you probably can't find a normal, if that doesn't sound like a contradiction, that there's such a wide variety of investment in pitches that the mean doesn't really seem to mean that much. Without mixing my terms too much, I wonder if we reach the point that PR agencies are just simply pitching too much. I was looking back at some of the research for our Top 150 project, And that found that UK PR agencies are pitching more, with an average of 33.1 pitches per agency in 2023 compared to 30.3 in 2022. So we saw a roughly 10% increase in pitches last year. I expect that number will go up for 2024. I just think we're at a stage where, because of the costs involved, and costs in terms of manpower and effort as much as any other costs, it really feels like agencies have to be so careful about where they allocate their resources for pitching versus their resources for other things, not least looking after their staff and looking after their clients, their existing clients. So yeah, I would be interested to know if people think that agencies are in general pitching too much. I mean, I suspect they may be.
Surely, yeah. I heard of a pitch a while ago where one of the agencies involved believed that they were up against 17 others who had submitted proposals, and they predicted that each agency had spent between 10 and 15k on that pitch. They also said that they thought the account would likely be retained by the incumbent, so it's definitely a crowded market. On the average number of pitches, I mean, it probably will go up a bit, but I'm not sure it will increase dramatically, because I've also been hearing from a lot of agencies about them kind of winning work from existing clients in new regions or in services outside of PR, kind of expanding their remits in that way. I think that's probably partially because it's easier for in-house teams to have fewer relationships to manage and kind of just go to those trusted agencies and increase the amount of work they're giving them. So it kind of strikes me that it's not just the huge agencies that are seen as one-stop shops for multiple services anymore. Smaller agencies are seeing the benefits of that too.
And we definitely see that in the stories that we're writing. You know, the expansion into different areas of PR would fit what you're saying there, Evie. And I think as well, the conversations I've had, there's less retained and more project-based work, again, which would fit what you've just said. But also, I've had agencies say to me that they're getting a bit stricter in the sort of approach on how they're pitching, where they're asking more questions and actually thinking, do you know what, it's not worth it in the long run. I'll cut my losses now before we take this any further. They're sort of saying if anything's a bit suspect, they're just not pursuing it. And obviously there's some agencies that will have the luxury to do that. I always feel a bit sorry for maybe the smaller teams that, as you say, John, struggle to balance the how do you approach new work and get new clients and keep that coming in, but also keep your existing clients happy and keep that balance. It must be very difficult, and especially on a small team.
Yeah, I think so. But equally, going back to the holding company results, I mean, some of those show that you look at Burson, not picking on Burson, by the way, it's just because it's the most recent example, and they did talk about Pfizer, but that shows that sometimes you lose one client and it's just really, really hard to pick it up. And undoubtedly Burson are winning business, you know, here, there and everywhere, which is great. But these things aren't necessarily that simple. But I definitely agree on a few points there. Firstly, the one about organic growth in terms of getting more business from existing clients. I mean, that's got to be, and you know, agencies have always told me that that's the holy grail, really. You know, so you don't have to be involved in pitching. You can build steadily and have long-term relationships with clients for whom there's mutual respect and mutual trust. I mean, that's a good way to do it, as I'm sure everyone knows. But that point about agencies doing a lot more than PR, I hear that all the time these days. I mean, particularly in the consumer world. I mean, I wrote a piece a while ago about whether pure, in inverted commas, consumer PR agencies have a future. And the more I talk to people from consumer agencies, the more that idea seems to be supported, really. I mean, I don't think there are that many consumer agencies that literally only do PR. You know, I'm not saying that can't work, but I'm just saying it's much harder these days. So I really think that one of the biggest themes we've seen in agency land has been the expansion of consumer shops that are traditionally PR into much broader remits.
I think some as well are really tightening up the work on that as well, in the sense of making sure that they're being paid correctly for that extra work that they're putting in. Because I think sometimes PR agencies, because they can be a bit people pleaser, I think, can't they?
Yeah.
And just accept that, oh yeah, we'll do that, we'll take that on. But as a result, then you really need to then also make sure that you're getting paid for that work. Because I think sometimes that can escape PR. So I think they can think, we'll just do it, and people pleasing is what's happening, basically.
But equally, I think a lot of PR agencies expanding into things like advertising have quite a strong stance on the fact that if they can bring a PR approach to an out-of-home billboard or something like that, then they can kind of compete with advertising more than they may have been able to in the past and kind of justify why they're a better choice than a pure ad agency or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's PR evolving the way that it tries to prove its worth.
Yes, absolutely.
And finally, it is so nearly that most wonderful time. Christmas campaigns will soon be falling like snowflakes in a Dickens novel. Stay tuned to PR Week over the coming days for the first. Does that metaphor work?
I quite like that. You're speaking to an English graduate, so I'm always going to like a reference to Dickens.
Brilliant. No, good. I'm glad. Christmas campaigns. We had predictions for the campaigns back in September, but now we're looking at what we'd like to see from Christmas activity this year. So, Siobhan, what's on your festive campaign wish list this year?
Okay, so number one, I would like to see Dawn French return as the M&S fairy in the food.
Right.
Marks
We're
and
going very
Spencer's food
specific.
campaign. I'm going very specific. I know exactly what I want to see this year, John. If that fairy's not back, I'm going to be really disappointed.
Yeah, having a word.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Dear Marks and Spencer. What else is on my wish list? Well, I'd like to see more sentimental festive campaigns. We saw a hint last year with the Amazon's 2023 Christmas ad, the Joyride one, which was three elderly friends sharing joy and childhood memories on a snowy hill. So for me, I'd like to see more of that.
I think with all the kind of nostalgia-centred campaigns that we've had recently, it would make sense to have a bit of a return to that sentimental, sort of like looking back on the good old days. Like I feel like I see a lot of memes of like what your childhood Christmas was like, and it's photos of like more tacky Christmas trees and stuff like that. So I think people really want to see that nostalgic like 90s, 2000s Christmas. I think that could come up. That would be nice to see.
What else would you like to see, Evie? What's on your wish list?
We had an op-ed a little while ago from Lucy Hart at the Romans about PRing the ad, and I think putting my kind of PR head on, that would be quite nice. It'd be good to see campaigns that aren't just sort of a simple 30-second clip, but more that kind of become a cultural moment. So I guess an obvious example is Kevin the Carrot, and that's usually done by kind of the formula of having multiple campaign films with a bit of a storyline and then selling soft toys of the characters that star in the films. I don't know if there's a way to PR the ad beyond that formula, but it would be nice to see, I think. Looking more broadly at trends we've had and how that could evolve into Christmas campaigns, it'd be good to see some sort of light-hearted rivalries and fake scandal. I was thinking kind of like the Colin and Cuthbert the Caterpillar drama, but with Yule logs, something like that. Like, just put a festive twist on it. People will love that, surely.
Well, the product's already there.
Exactly. Yeah.
What about you, John?
Well, okay, so I've got three things. Number one,
Okay.
campaigns based on genuine earned media thinking that the media wants to talk about. I'm thinking about the Missing Bounty campaign from a couple of years ago that really generated a huge amount of publicity, and I think is probably my favourite, if you like, pure earned media or nearly pure earned media Christmas campaign from recent years. So I think purpose should be used in a way that relates directly to the business and isn't an afterthought, and done in a way that is a genuine collaboration, long-term collaboration between a charity or good cause. And obviously a lot of the big supermarket groups do that, but I think more of that, please. And the third one, I categorise it under the term no drama. I don't mean let's not have some sort of social media buzz and let's not have all the kind of debates and stuff like that. But I think we really want to avoid the controversies that could detract from all the great creative work out there. I mean, we could talk about the sort of recent Heinz campaigns that were accused of perpetuating racist stereotypes. Last year, there were the M&S Christmas campaign featuring burning Christmas hats that some said reflected the Palestinian flag. I mean, from that point of view, I'm wishing for a quiet Christmas, really.
Do you think some of the campaigns might be safer, in inverted commas, this year as a result of some of the drama that happened on last year's Christmas?
I think there's going to be a lot of safety first taken, but I also think sometimes these things can't be avoided. I mean, you give the example of those campaigns, the Heinz one, obviously not a Christmas campaign, but nobody did that on purpose. Nobody tried to make those controversial. I'm sure the people involved in them thought that they were just pretty decent campaigns that gave a positive message about the products they were selling. And similarly, the Christmas flags campaign, I don't think anyone could have predicted that. Well, maybe they could have predicted that, but that felt like one that was a real left field situation, really. I think a lot of people were genuinely extremely surprised by that. So I kind of think there will be a lot of playing safe, but I also think there's a danger that these things will just come out unintended. It's the unintended drama that I think I'm keen to avoid.
And do you think we're going to see humour? We definitely, the campaigns at Cannes showed that.
To be fair, I think Christmas campaigns generally have a sort of a decent dollop of humour in them. I mean, unless it's the very earnest tearjerker ones, and even then, there's usually a slight bit of light relief. But I think a lot of the best campaigns are those that are kind of bittersweet. They'll have the humour mixed in with the sad bits and obviously the product placement and all the rest of it. So, yeah, I mean, I expect to see humour. I expect Kevin the Carrot to be back doing his thing and, a bit of cheekiness, a bit of light-hearted elements and, all that good stuff that makes this upcoming season what it is, I would say.
Some celebrity cameos too, although in the nicest way possible. The one person who is not on my Christmas wish list for the campaigns is Rick Astley. I think we've seen enough of him with Specsavers, and he was also in the Sainsbury's ad last year. So
he was, yes, yeah.
If anyone's gone with him, I'd be interested to hear why. Although we are going to the launch of the Sainsbury's Christmas campaign tomorrow.
Yeah, we have no idea. Don't think we know anything, but we're very excited to see what's going to be.
So what you're saying, Evie, is you want the Astley family to have a lean Christmas this year?
I mean, I think they've done all right awards wise for the rest of the year. They can have a quiet Christmas, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Right, so that's almost all for Beyond the Noise this week. But before we go, we want your view on who has been the best UK communicator of 2024. The editorial team have been deep in discussion this week about who deserves to be among the 20 names in our annual UK Communicator of the Year list. So who do you think has excelled for their comms this year? Drop us a line with a brief one sentence explaining why they should be on the list. If we use that person, we'll aim to include comments that have been sent in to us. You could drop me a line with your suggestions at john.harrington@haymarket.com, or you can send a message to the PRWeek UK LinkedIn account. Just to say, the person you choose must be British or live in the UK, and we're excluding journalists and also comms professionals. This year we've decided, perhaps controversially, to also exclude politicians. Frankly, it gets a bit partisan and it's difficult to separate the PR from the policy. So no party leaders or other political folk either, please. So get involved. Thanks to Siobhan and Evie for taking part today. If you've enjoyed this episode, then we'd love it if you could leave a review, please, wherever you access PR Week's Beyond the Noise podcast. Thanks for listening. Until next time, goodbye.